is Esmeralda from the Small Business Development Center. We have Heidi Kirkland, Small Business Development Center Analyst, here presenting the Great Marketing Turnaround Session 3. And we have Robert Theobald from the ACA to speak a few words about the ACA. So whenever you're ready, Heidi.
Yeah, let me, before we talk with Bob a second, I just want to give people some time and a heads up because this is a hands-on webinar workshop. So we have sent you ahead of time some resources, but if you did not have time, now is a great time at the beginning to get these starter activities downloaded. There is a long address on there, but I will ask Esme to put in the chat a direct links to the two things you want are the marketing mix. It's an idea starter that you can print out. It's best to print it out because we're going to work with it. We're also going to be using something called the cost benefit exercise, and that's an Excel file. So Esme will put the links to those right here in our chat. And as we get set up and get going with some of the introductions and basic background information, you can get those two things ready. You'll also need this link to the marketing management assessment, but I will give that to you when we need it. So most important thing is to get those two tools downloaded. You can find them under session 3 on the page that's in the first link in your chat, or you can directly use the links to those items. So without further ado, let's go ahead and go ahead. The floor will be yours, Bob. And this is Bob Theobald, Small Business Ombudsman, VP of Small Business Services from Arizona Commerce Authority.
Hi, how's everybody doing today? Glad to be here. I'm Robert Theobald, or they also call me Bob. I go by both names, so those that know me best call me Bob, and that is good. So I'm excited to be here today to share just a couple minutes, and I'm actually going to do a screen share real quick. Is that okay if I share my screen?
Yeah, Heidi, you're going to have to stop sharing yours so Bob can share his.
Got it. We're good.
All right. So one of the things I want to talk about today is we've got a group of small business owners, is our Small Business Boot Camp and Resource Collective. The ACA is the state's economic development organization, and as the Vice President of Small Business Services, we work to provide tools and resources to help small businesses get started and grow stronger. And so our Small Business Boot Camp and Resource Collective is a tool and a program that we started about 54 weeks ago. Actually 55, we just finished our 55th week of presentations at 10 o'clock. They wrapped up, and that's why I was a little late getting on here. But on this website that you can see is our website for it, and I'll post the link in the chat so you don't have to worry about that. But you can see our upcoming sessions that we have. We do webinars twice a week, every Tuesday morning, every Thursday morning, and they're on topics to help small businesses. Today we had financial statements put together by a team of SBDC directors throughout the state. But another cool piece on this is not just the upcoming sessions. You have a resource collective with tools and resources by our community partners. And then down here at the bottom where it says archived, you can open up each of these weeks and see the different sessions. And as you see, we have a lot of weeks. We are in week 54. Or we just completed week 55. This is for week 54, and you can see we did one on how to motivate and incentivize employees, and this was last week, and then also bookkeeping basics last week. And so this is a great resource for everyone. Then you get to see our giant list of community partners. This is not having to listen to us from the Arizona Commerce Authority talk for an hour twice a week, but we bring in experts in their field to share their expertise with everybody. So it's a great tool, great resource, and I hope everybody can take advantage of it. So I will turn it back to Heidi. You're still on mute, Heidi.
Yeah, Heidi, you're muted.
Just want to get us back on track there. Everybody should be able to see my screen again. So yes, the Arizona Commerce Authority is an important SBDC partner, so we wouldn't be able to do a lot of our great work without their support and collaboration. For those of you who are new to the SBDC Vets, I know that this is the third part in the series, but there are some of you who might have just joined us. I just want to talk briefly about the services and resources that we provide, mostly no fee or very low cost to the business owners. And that's because of our support from Arizona Commerce Authority. And we are funded on the federal level by the Small Business Administration and here locally by Maricopa Community Colleges. So just an overview, if you're not familiar with the SBDC, Maricopa SBDC is part of the full network of SBDCs throughout the country. But we also have 10 SBDC centers here in Arizona. And here in Maricopa County, we have 17 different counselors spread across the county. So that makes it easy access in normal times, but we're mostly working virtually this time, which seems to work nicely for some of our clients. At the end of the session today, I will talk to you a little bit more about how to request counseling services, which is the mainstay of what we do. Our counselors are skilled in a variety of areas. I said again that this is no fee counseling, business counseling. We help clients identify and access funding and lenders. We offer financial review. We do marketing assessment and planning, a variety of different things that we can work with you on. We also do offer low-cost training, such as the programs like our topics today, the Great Marketing Turnaround. And then combined with our counseling and training, there are a variety of tools and resources that we make available to all of our clients. So I'm not going to spend too much time, especially if you're a repeat Great Marketing Turnaround attendee. You've already heard my introduction, so I don't want to spend our precious time on this. I do bring many years experience in marketing turnarounds, both large and small businesses and a wide variety of industries and markets. And versed in a variety of tactics, which we're going to talk a lot about media tactics today, advertising, graphics, copywriting, digital marketing, PR, event marketing, direct marketing, all of that. But more importantly, I think just to know is that I'm an advocate of results-based strategic marketing, and that marketing that is customer-centric, meaning surrounding our marketing plan based on customers. So I think that's the important thing. Also, Esme is going to be co-facilitating this webinar. You'll hear from her. She's handling your interactions. So she will be talking to you about questions and polls and things like that. So good to have her with us today. So to kick things off, I would like for you all to take a very short 1-minute assessment that's about your marketing management practices. So it's going to have to be typed in. Well, actually, Esme, you got the link in there. Perfect. If you can just hit that link, you're going to open up a very short 10-question assessment that will help you figure out your sort of status point. And so I want you to answer quickly and just as honest as you can, yes or no, based on what your usual normal practice is. So don't overthink this. I'm just going to be silent for about 60 seconds. And if you could do me a favor and raise your hands when you're finished. All right, so finish up, and again, don't overthink it, but when you get through all 10 questions, I want you to keep your score alive or up. We're going to refer back to it. Go ahead and raise your hands if you can when you're done, and keep that score up, because we're going to, as we go through today's topics, we're going to give you some ideas to address some of the challenges that you could be having. And so this is a good way of identifying and categorizing some of those particular areas. Just give me about 30 more seconds, and don't rush it, guys, but don't overthink it.
We're getting those hands raised. There's about 8 people with their hands raised.
Okay. And I see a few familiar faces actually in this, so some of them may have taken this before. But let me give you about 10 more seconds. And if you're still working on it, even as we move on, that's fine. Just go ahead and finish it. You're going to push the submit button and then just go ahead and save all of your information, the results information. So if you have finished it, rather than looking at your total score, which I'm going to guess that people typically land somewhere between 30 and 80%. I'd rather us focus on the areas that you may have been struggling with. So if you had the wrong answer on question 1 or 4, that means that your area is to focus on is to really know your customer. And that's a topic we covered really extensively last in the session number 1. So maybe review the video for that session if you missed it live. Those are available, and we'll talk about that at the end. If you had some problems with questions number 2 or number 7, then your area of focus is really to invest more time and effort, plain and simple. Often this is really the hardest thing, but it's probably, if those are your areas, the most effective change you can make, and we'll provide some tips on that, efficiencies. Numbers 3 and 5, if you were off track there, if they're problematic, then you stay tuned for some tips on analyzing methods around cost benefit, because we'll get to that near the end. And if 6 and 9 were off, then pay extra attention to when we speak about measurement. We'll also be talking throughout, or have been talking throughout, about investing and planning, as that's really the means to the end, instead of being reactive or just trying whatever you can or everything you hear of. So if 8 or 10 are your areas, those categories are about being a little bit more strategic and narrowing your approach so that you can be more cost effective. So if you scored below that 30%, don't feel disheartened, you're in the right place. This could be the indication that you might need some assistance. And again, there's an SBDC counselor ready to help you when we get through with our webinar, and you can always sign up for that. So let's see. Oh, and if you already got 90 or 100%, then maybe you should be the one teaching this. But I'm sure there'll be something here for you. So I'm just kidding. Let's do a really quick recap on things that we've been covering since session 1. So during the Great Marketing Turnaround sessions, we introduced this concept that marketing has this part science, part art. There's no real formula, but there is kind of a sort of global formula that you can maneuver in your own creative way. So that's to deliver the right message about the right product or service to the right audience at the right time. And today's activities are going to build on these past sessions we mostly talked about the right audience and the right, defining that right product, service, benefit message. And we're going to build on that and talk a little bit more about how to get that message out into that right audience at the right time. So even though we've covered some of these things in the past sessions, these key elements, you can go back and listen to them in the videos, and we'll kind of be building on them today as we put the implementation all together. There's a lot to cover when it comes to selecting and deploying and managing your marketing mix. So we're going to go really, really fast. And I'll stop at points to ask questions. So if your question's not answered right away in the chat, Esme's keeping track. So hopefully we will get to that at those key points. So the topics today, I've organized them just for my own value in remembering them. I'm a teacher and I love memory aids. So we're going to call them the 3 M's. And this is really going to be all about sort of the marketing mix and choosing methods that we will use to get the word out. So this will help us remember them. We're kind of be matching our message to the right media. And then the most critical element of really sustaining our marketing program is management. And that's going to include measurement and what I call best practice mechanisms. So it's worth mentioning that when you start with the goals, which we covered significantly in our last 2 sessions, you really uplift your plan. And this is more important during COVID to really get succinct about those goals. We won't have a whole lot of time to cover about goals, but I just wanted to keep mentioning that they should be the lead for all of your promotional efforts. So, back to if revenue related activities, short-term business health is important, then let that be the lead to some of the things you're doing. But at the same time, remember, you might have to have some longer term goals to take advantage of some opportunities in the future. So goals, we're going to talk about how we build along that way and stay true to that customer-centric, data-informed marketing plan. Regular attention to the plan. Remember your assessment scores 7, 8, and 10 are related to planning. So the topics we cover have to do with investing in some strategy. So selecting the media or the elements of a successful marketing mix. We're going to start with M number 1, the message. So if we look at the message, I like to break it down into, again, 3 C's, into the areas of content, creative, and consistency. So we're going to talk about each one. In the area of content, the number 1 piece of advice, and I'm sure many of you have heard it before, but it remains true: 1 goal, 1 main idea per communication. This follows that idea of really knowing what your goals are or your objectives are before you start, not to dilute and overwhelm your audience. The second content issue has to do with targeting, making your message very specific to the target market segment that you're trying to converse with. Again, we spent a lot of our session number 1 on this topic, so I'm not going to belabor it. I'll just tell you that targeting is going to come up over and over again if you're using strategic marketing. Another topic we covered in session 2, where we did the FAB analysis, and that is that your content needs to offer benefits. And the old marketing term used to be sell the sizzle, not the steak. But what we're looking at is really trying to translate anything about our product and services into something meaning and relevant in terms of a benefit for the end user, customer centric. Again, session 2 is a good place to look for a worksheet on that. This one should not have to be one of the reminders, but I can tell you that it happens way more often than you think, that people will forget the basics on how to reach them. Your website needs to be on everything, and it needs to be clickable if that's at all possible. But don't forget, there's still value in things like phone numbers and address if you're at physical locations. Don't forget the basics when it comes to contact information. And the last content reminder is also something that throws back to session 2. We discovered there's a model for creating messages that's very helpful. And this model is basically begins with the end in mind. Again, what do you want them to do? And it is aligned with the stages that a buyer goes through when deciding whether to make a purchase. So I'm going to bring that up again. We're not going to go into it in depth, but I want you to be able to refer to this as one of the main elements in designing your content. So the ADA model, which is part of the worksheets from last session, includes all the steps that you want to take your audience through, sometimes over and over again in line with several communications. So I highly recommend you look at this and you consider this when you're building and crafting any communications. The process starts with getting their attention, then developing their interest and holding their interest until they get to that desire point, and then of course the call to action and getting them to follow through whatever that specific goal was. It's not always a sale. Each communication may have a separate goal. And the steps could be much shorter for some media that we're going to talk about, and much longer, but the model is going to apply. For example, on a billboard that's mainly visual and very few words, there's going to be a quick attention. I mean, the focus is going to be the picture, the hook. Maybe it's a really catchy phrase. So that's going to bring them into interest and desire very fastly. And maybe there's an action, a phone number or an arrow to turn here or a hashtag for a later. So this billboard would compress this whole model. But if you were doing an email or an e-blast, you would have a lot more time to spell out the reasons and develop that interest and that ability and add links to provide support of evidence and There's more space for copy and more images if you have that need to kind of create that desire. And then you can have lots of clickable buttons in an email, so calls to action. So when you're selecting your media, really thinking about how this model works for that media, and we'll go into that a little bit more. And it's just really kind of a mashup of a couple of our M's as we're going to cover them. So the last thing I'll say about this is that don't put too much in terms of this action always needing to be the actual purchase. It's really whatever is the next logical step on the purchase journey. It's a step that you want them to take now. That's where the emphasis is. So back to goals or objectives. Before you write one word of content, you need to know what it is that you want them to do. Maybe it's to share your social media post with friends. Maybe it's to call you for a price quote. Maybe it's to go to a specific landing page on your website, but know what you want them to do and giving them the motivation to create that desire and action. So I'll give you some hints on call to action incentives in a few minutes when we get, or at the end when we get to mechanisms, best practices. All right, second C is creative. And this is just going to get, Heidi's little tip list. It's tricky because you might think that something that's really cool is going to be the thing, but your target market might not see the coolness in it. So putting together good creative is not about having the coolest stuff. It's about having the most effective stuff. Do you want to be award winning, or do you want to be action inspiring, get them to do what you want them to do? So because I say that it's not just about cool or just about what you think is good, I'm going to mention in this area that some of us have certain skills in this area, but not all of us are great designers or great copywriters. So I want to give you some things to consider as you create your next ad or Facebook post or any kind of content. First of all, in case I'm doing jargon on you, copy is, it refers to the text or the spoken word in your messaging. It could be visual, it could be spoken, a radio commercial, it's going to be spoken, a video, it'll be spoken. So it's the script, or it could be the text on a blog. So all of this is called copy. And these are some of the things I want you to take some consideration as you evaluate what you're doing. Professional sounds obvious. What do I mean by this? It's kind of an eye of the beholder. So it's going to be different from industry to industry, or audience to audience, or product to product. More and more, we're seeing a lot of what I call raw, bare bones kind of creative. And so it's hard to say what's professional or what's unprofessional. I think what you need to care about is that, is it coming across as a certain quality worthy of consideration by your market? Professionalism matters in promotion for a couple of reasons. And I'll put the first one bluntly, and it's because of competition. You're in a comparison world. So in a digital age, consumers can see a lot. And they're not going to accept a brand whose use of communication techniques don't match what their sophistication is or what their shopping level is. They just have too many options and too many other choices. So it'll be a really kind of quick impression. So professionalism, because consumers do place a value on their time, they want to attend to what they think is worth it. So professionalism is how you quickly demonstrate that your information is worth it. So in addition to following the ADA formula, you have to have something that's going to be relevant and professional for them to consider it. Now, not everyone is great, as I said, at writing. It's just kind of like dancing. Some are good, some are not. And you can be trained to get better. But if it's not your strength, and especially if being able to tailor to a particular audience isn't an area where you're strong in, then somebody else needs to be writing your copy. And we can talk a little bit about outsourcing later, but it is an advantage if that's an area that you need help. However, does professional mean that you have to be stuffy and grammatically correct and all that kind of stuff? The opposite is actually true. So bullet point number one has to do with being conversational. You still want to be catchy. You still need to match the tone of your audience and speak their language. One of the things that I tell people to do is to read everything out loud, even if it is intended for the printed world. Conversational means like people speak. So it's not an academic standard. On the other hand, back to professional, it's still not okay to have errors. So it's kind of a fine line. You really want to create that conversational feel and still maintain a professionalism. And then the last part, which may again seem obvious, but it does feed into the professionalism and the investment. No matter how professional you are, there's going to be mistakes that you might make. So try and catch them before you release it to your audience by having somebody else proofread it. So the second creative consideration is overall design. And this is whether it's print, whether you're creating video, whether you're even doing a radio script, any medium. Intentional design is really important. Graphic design does a couple of things. Good design increases the readability of something. So if you want somebody's eye to go to certain things, there's actual techniques for that. Good design communicates more quickly since we're competing, and time is one of the things we're competing for. Good design can create more inspiration and convincing trust. It's used specifically to do different things. Different design has different jobs to get people to the key information. So instead of just grabbing the first image that comes up in your Google search, you would consider, really what images are needed. Remember the ADA formula. And design just becomes a skill that is either developed through some significant training, or maybe, it's magically inherent and you have that talent for it. But either way, there are some important boxes to check in this area. So good design is going to follow principles. There's principles of balance and space and proportion and color and timing, and video, there's tips on lighting, and, there's audio qualities. So no matter what the medium, there's rules of design. I will tell you that if you don't have the skill, today's age, you can get away with quite a lot. But that's because most of the time there's the availability of templates. On the other hand, somebody's favorite friend, designing stuff. I recently witnessed a logo design of a larger organization. They took a new logo design and they had someone untrained in the graphic arts to do it. And it's because I know how to use Illustrator, Adobe Illustrator, but they didn't have the graphic arts training and background. And the result was haphazard. It was conspicuously amateur looking. And within months, everything was redone at very great expense. So if you don't understand things like what Gestalt is or what negative space is, they're not arbitrary and intended to intimidate. There's actually value in them. And you could consider this being an area to hire a pro, or really stick to those templates where somebody has designed them with intent. Also in this area, I'm just going to say purposeful has already been alluded to when I told you, you want something that's action inspiring, not award winning. So measure your design by how well it will get the customer to the next goal, that ADA model. That's where you measure it by, not how pretty it is. Branding also, not accidental. Visual branding, the strength of your business identity, it's a result of consistent style and graphic standards. So it is purposeful, it is principled design. I like to use for all of this in terms of design, the branding example from Amazon, from their starting original logo into their logo that they've used today. So it not only shows you about these idea towards design principles, but it conveys information about basically selling everything from A to Z. So let's focus in on this current logo. You can see how it evolved, and you can see some of the professionalism that I'm talking about. But this evolution kind of adds to it. What if you could jump over some of this iteration and get to the end a lot quicker through using some of these recommendations, it may make you more successful quicker. Because if you notice how long their current logo has been in use, it's been around for like 20 years. So it's got everything. It's got the bonus of the smiley face insinuation here. It implies they have everything from A to Z. It's got some design principles that I don't have time to educate you in, and it works because it follows some of the things we've said. So the third C is consistency. And we spoke about that in terms of branding, and that's why we do some of that. It's one of the principles of influence that I discussed last session. So I talked about principles that influence people. Consistency is one of the best muscles to develop for long-term marketing success. I call it part of this superpower duo. Superpower duo is consistency and repetition. And these two, aid recognition and recall, they contribute to trust when the buyer is going along the journey. It's just shown people are more likely to purchase from a company they know and trust, and that branding and the consistency creates the familiarity. It's a trust building advantage, just like the Amazon logo I showed you. And then also these two things are a tool for engagement, particularly post-purchase. So branding is as much for retention as it is for business development, if not more. So what do I mean by consistency in terms of executing that? Well, these may be obvious, but I'm going to cover them anyway. You want to have a tone and a manner and a look and feel to what you execute. And that's why, again, if that's not instinctive to you, having somebody help you with this would be great. And that's because you're doing what people, when you hear people talk about, when they ask if something is on brand, they're looking for this. They're looking to see that you've got some kind of consistent manner, look, and feel of both physical, voice, and the viewability of what you're providing. So to achieve consistency, your message has to be presented not only in a similar tone and fashion, but also kind of with that common unique selling principle, that differentiation, which we covered in sessions 1 and 2. So you want to set out to give them that consistent message, that consistent feel, that consistent creative. You can achieve this if you have the tools to manage it very easily. So that's what having identity standards or a style guide or a brand book, these graphic standards are more than just your logo. You know, it can include colors and fonts and types of visuals. Like we don't do cartoon clips, or we do not mixing all of your images in a variety of different ways. It could also include linguistic elements. There's certain catchphrases, not just your slogan, but preferred verbiage that you would use in all your marketing and train your staff to use. So doing those type of things, logo consistency is sort of the baseline, but always trying to, make sure you don't distort your logo or change your logo over time too much. So all of these things help to contribute to that building of trust, that familiarity. In some cases, I just thought of another example of how a voice or a campaign character or a spokesman does that. If any of you have ever heard of Flo, anybody know where she's from? If we were in a live, I can hear you all say progressive, so I'm just going to assume. So that's just part of that whole idea that consistency and branding take a lot of different shapes and form. If you're working with an SBDC counselor, you want to really focus in on brand. There is a growth wheel, which is one of the tools we use, a growth wheel decision sheet that you can complete to really get into this in depth. But if you're just to do it yourself, well, even Google brand style guides would be a good start. And then the last part is, as your company grows, it's necessary to create digital asset management tools to keep your images and designs really accessible to everybody that needs them. The biggest problem with using the right stuff is not having access to it. Or having it change and not everybody's got the latest. So a single source of truth means everything is one place for whether you're using it in-house or you're outsourcing. Talking fast, told you I need to. A couple of disclaimers on this. I've told you consistency, but consistency doesn't mean being boring and redundant, because overusing the same stuff really gets stale. The same stock photo on every page in your website. That's just not gonna do the attention and interest part. But you can still keep innovation and creativity going on within the boundaries of this consistency goal. It comes back to knowing what you are, knowing what you mean to your customer, and really staying true to that brand essence. Another thing, maybe this goes back to the Amazon logo, but if a certain type of image or content is not generating the results you struck out to go for, if you're not getting the engagement, it's not efficiently happening, or it's just not working, you need to take steps to rectify that situation. In other words, posting something that's wrong consistently doesn't help. You won't increase your overall brand engagement if you're consistently wrong. So that overused word about pivot is still valuable even while I'm talking about the value of consistency. So I'm talking about consistency right now for messaging. It's going to come back again when we talk about frequency. So just keep in mind that that's a big win word. Okay, so first, our content, creative, and consistency. I'm going to rush through this, but here's some things that you might jot down that you can do on this topic. I want you to just think about your marketing, not right now, later, because we got to move on, but later come up, which of these things is your strength? I always think it's important to look at this on starting with what you're good at. I'm really good at, the creative design. I have a knack for that. Or I'm really good at coming up with the messaging, the content. And then from that, pick another C out of the area that you really want to work on. And using this as a homework assignment, choosing that other C, think about one thing out of the things that I've talked to you about today that you could work on, one tip. If it's the content that's tripping you up, maybe you have to go all the way back to the unique selling principle that and the ADA formula that we talked about in prior sessions. Those tools will help you with your content. If you know you've got your content down, but maybe your creative execution isn't successful, then maybe you need to hire that subject matter specialist. Get a copywriter or a designer involved and polish up your strategy a little bit. But if you're feeling really good about those two things, then maybe it's probably the consistency that deserves some attention. Do you have your identity standards distributed out to everybody that needs to use them? Do you have some key messaging templates like the one we worked on in session 2 so that the entire team is on the same page? So that's where we're going to go with that. Now we need to go on to next M, because this is where a lot of our time is going to go. This one is about media. Taking a breath, but want to march forward, because you can see there's 5 big topics that we're going to cover when I talk about media. And when I say media, that's just because I've always considered media one of the M's, but in today's world, probably a more stronger word is methods. So methods of sending out our communications. These are the broad spectrum of marketing activities that allow you to deliver your message. And so some of the considerations that you need to have when you're choosing your media are, does the method type make sense for your business, your product? Is it a good match to the message and to the target market? Can it deliver the numbers? We'll talk about what that means, reach and frequency. Can I measure whether there's a good return on investment? Is it even affordable? And we'll cover these as much as I can in the small amount of time we have. So we'll start with the first one, types of media. This example is from the tool called Growth Wheel that a lot of our counselors use. It shows a list of 6 broad categories of marketing that you can be inspired by. And I'm going to give you another tool for brainstorming later, so you don't have to necessarily take this all down. We'll be doing that brainstorming of different ways to market in a moment. And also, actually, I can send you a Growth Wheel article, which contains the same layout after the session. So don't get too bogged down on reading the entire thing. The point this slide makes is that there are so many different marketing methods to choose from. And I go back to that idea of matching the media to the actual purpose. If, for example, it's your goal to attract new customers, you may choose a different media than if you were trying to maintain and build your existing customer base or strengthen the brand. Knowing that purpose, it's easier to go through all of these different options once that purpose is established. So before we do that brainstorming activity to identify these methods, I want to take a closer look at some of these choices that you're going to have to make when you're selecting media. And remember, when I say media, I also mean all methods. A great place to start is, what are you already doing? So if you could take a moment here, what methods is your company already using that has been effective? So what components of your marketing mix has been the most effective for your company? So I'd like you to take a moment and answer this question. You can put it in chat. I invite you to share this, because be as specific as you can. In the last year, what has worked best for you? And this is kind of how we help each other through this process. So just take a moment here. I see some social media coming up. PR. If you're in startup, you're right. You might not have some examples here, but you're looking at some and reading some of the examples. You've got some people using Groupon, New Times. Social media is becoming one of the successful options. Events, this is another good one, email. So keep looking at these as you are putting your answer in. And then a rhetorical question, why you think these methods were successful? Because we want to try and replicate the successes, even in a changing market. Oh, I love some of these things that are coming up. Ads at a local gym, that I think is one of my examples I've given. Just be careful when you say word of mouth. I'm gonna call you on it because I want you to tell me what it is you're doing that creates word of mouth, because we're going to talk about later. There's a difference between earned effect and the actual action that you take. So when we talk in a little bit in a minute, word of mouth is usually a result of some kind of marketing activity, or you have the ability to create word of mouth, put another way, by using some of your marketing strategy and planning. So these are great events. I love that you guys have a wide variety. This is going to be a fun session when we get to brainstorming. So, but let me talk a little bit more about types. So I want to tell you that a philosophy of mine is variety is the spice of life. I didn't come up with it, but variety is the spice of life. Well, what I mean in that, in the media sense, that the concept of a marketing mix implies variety. So we're going to get into some different ways to look at the differences in media, so that understanding of the differences helps you know what you're choosing between. So we're going to look at traditional and new media. We're going to look at dialogue versus monologue media or methods. And then we're going to talk about paid versus unpaid, which again has a little bit to do with what I said about, is it an earned media, or is it an owned media, or is it a purchased media? So all of these things are going to come into play when you choose. So let's start with the first one. I call it traditional versus new. A lot of it's new happens to be digital, so it doesn't matter the label. Traditional media is what we think of as the mass media, typical advertising, marketing methods that sort of predate the internet. Traditional media allows you to really get a broad target audience, billboards, print, television commercials, a lot of other out of home techniques fall under this. When we talk about cold calling or door-to-door direct sales, these are some of the more traditional ways of marketing. And then as marketing has evolved, new methods that are reliant on the internet, they call it new media, but some of these have been around a really long time. So I don't know that I would say they're new so much as they're continuously evolving. So maybe emerging media is another term I've heard used. So these are much more focused. They're more about targeting a narrow audience, like social media does, and paid online ads and pulling in from search tags. So having said that, all these marketing methods are probably going to continue to evolve on both sides. We just separate them in this way as a way to really kind of look at whether or not they're linked to delivery via the internet. So I like to call them digital media. If you hear me say that instead of new media, that's kind of what I use. And I'm not going to pick a side here. So there's pros and cons for both categories, but there is a reason why digital is becoming very, very popular. And that's because that's where the action is. Before the pandemic, I saw a statistic that said that a little more than 10% of most purchases in the US, retail purchases, took place online. And then just last year in Q2, it jumped an additional 16%. So in general, there's just movement and action there. So that makes some sense to be where the action is. Another reason is that traditional media, some people are saying consumers are getting harder to reach. Well, that's because ads, people can tune them out. Commercials can be skipped, radio stations are changed, mail is thrown away, and all of these traditional medias at least those that are promoting digital marketing say, well, they're not effective at all. Meanwhile, they're promoting the fact that the emerging media has some very sophisticated ways that they can track behavior through cookies and get digital ads in front of the people when they want to. And there's no debating that. I think a lot of you have experienced a lot of ads invading your digital world as a consumer. And the big three of digital advertising, Google, Facebook, and Amazon are really important. They're not to be ignored because where people are shopping is definitely an effective strategy. But I will say the same thing that happens to traditional media about tuning out can also happen to digital. So be aware that that other stuff that we talked about in terms of matching your message to your audience and the good copy and good design, that is where you kind of try and overcome that arena being skipped or ignored, whether it's traditional or online. So the pros for digital in general, and a lot of you mentioned social media quite a bit, is that price-wise, traditional media tends to cost more than new media. It's part of its broad targeting. It's part of the way that the channels are set up. So we'll talk about this more when we talk about cost, because the cost, when we measure and compare cost per thousands and stuff, it seems pretty outrageous. Another pro for digital is what I've already mentioned, is that it's very data driven, then more so than most traditional media, but it's also very interactive. So those are two pros. I also said that there's going to be pushback that is already arising in the arena of digital media. It's encountering resistance just like traditional media, fast forwarding through ads. So consumer markets are starting to complain, and there's an overuse of tracking. And there's pushback from all of that on what the first party data use and trying to create ways around for privacy protection. And new media is probably going to be reinvented, or is being reinvented as we speak, so that first party data may not be as common. But I still believe that digital marketing has the advantage of being easier to track results. And so that's a very important benefit. Let's not ignore traditional media. And when I say the mix, sometimes it's a combination of both. Media use, as I alluded to several times already in the past sessions, media use is very personal, and your marketing needs to be tied back to the consumer's demographics, geographics, psychographics, buyer behavior, your target market. This is true of traditional and new media. And so why not, don't throw out the traditional media opportunities, even though I've already said there's some cost issues, because if let's say you're a brick and mortar establishment and you really know your target market. Let's say you know that you've done your work on Heidi's session number 1, and you know that your target market persona is a male who's 65, who lives in the metro area. And if that's the case, there's a good chance that advertising on the local news is good, because male 65 reaches the target market. 85% in that group prefer to get their news on TV. And so knowing your customer is really important. Another important thing in terms of choosing between these two media, and again, it's true of both sides, but trust has a lot to do with consumer engagement, and trust is a big driver of purchase. So consumers have certain associations, and there's been some research done on trust. And believe it or not, according to this recent survey by u.gov, Americans still put more trust in the areas of traditional advertising than they do in terms of those emerging areas. So you want to make sure that you're considering some of these factors. And again, all of the demographics and age and some other behavior influence this. So it's not a one size fits all, but know that trust is really important. So the bottom line message here is you want to choose media that, number 1, reaches your target market, and number 2, can be trusted. Final point on traditional versus emerging media that bears repeating: the synergy and the combination is what's going to create that greater sum from the individual parts. So that might mean use traditional and part new media in your mix. It's definitely not an either or kind of decision. All right. What are some marketing methods that you use that create dialogue with your customer? So you guys have put them in chat, but I want you to go ahead. You can choose more than one in our poll. So you can choose as many of these that you use. Some of you have already said social media. So I want you to think about which of these dialogue interactions you might use. So I'm going to start talking about it as you guys do the quiz, because I want to get through some of this content. I want to just say that social media is probably one that almost all of you will tick, but I want you to really be honest and maybe untick it. If I give you one criteria, you can't count social media as dialogue if you are only posting and nobody is commenting and nobody is sharing. Then it's monologue marketing. Most of social business posts are very monologue-like. So engagement is really important, and looking at the insights and like shares and comments, these are the goals. Put it down as dialogue if you have that engagement, but it's monologue if you're doing all the posting. So chat, same kind of thing. There's a difference between a bot that's personified and a real live response. So think about, how much of this is dialogue or how much of this is just artificial intelligence. So that's one of the things you can think about. There's chat on social media, and HubSpot did a study that found that the average response time for companies on Facebook is 1 hour and 56 minutes. So think about what your return time is on that chat. Most customers might want a response in 30 minutes. Not very many businesses are being able to meet that expectation. And Twitter expects you to have some responses on your tweets faster than that. So it's really media dependent. So really think about if you're responsive enough to consider whatever tools you're using as a dialogue, and whether they are positive for your customer's journey or a turnoff. So you might need to track something called abandon rates to fine tune this. Have we got a good set of answers yet?
Yes, so we have 66%. I'll end the poll so you can see the results.
Okay, and we'll talk about some of those other methods as you show the poll. So yeah, not surprising that we have a really strong representation from social media and from testimonials and reviews, another great interactive tool. Great response for events. I like to see people that are now, really using that, whether it's online events or live events. Surveys. So when it comes to surveys or quizzes, I think this is a really important one that we sometimes neglect. So write this down. If you had printed out that paper, it might not be too soon to think about some of these things, ideas that you're starting to collect, because quizzes and polls do a lot of great things. I just took an online quiz that roped me into a discount on a session. I was only half interested in it before the quiz. So the quiz is creating information as you gather it, or the survey is, but it's also giving information as you put it out. So that's another good one. Events, as things, safe live events are getting popular, and it helps you in those areas where being a part of community is important to building that trust and influencing your customers. There's also reviews. You guys are big on that, so that's great. One thing to mention, if you're thinking about testimonials that you're putting out, is to make sure that you capture legal permission to use some of the stuff that you've got submissions, because you don't want something to come back and bite you in the end. Now, if somebody's put that up there, there's probably a legal back end to the normal review sites, but if you're collecting testimonials on your own, make sure you cover yourself that way. Personal selling, great on that. And others put in chat. Cold calls, good. Promotions that require a promo code, so that's definitely a dialogue, but it's also sort of that last call to action. Facebook Live or some YouTube Live, all those live things are definitely great. So the reason that we are dialoguing about this aspect of choosing media methods is to make sure that you do one thing, and that is to consider that not all marketing impressions are equal. A customer involvement is something that creates movement in that buyer's journey. And that has more power than just putting out information. So just remember that when we think about dialogue versus monologue, where can you increase the dialogue? Lots of two-way talking needs to be in your marketing mix for it to be successful. That's going to give you more mileage out of your marketing. So the next time you consider or trying to decide between media, that's one of the variables, which brings me sort of to the next choice you have. And that is, very quickly, paid versus unpaid. So again, I like acronyms. So the acronym for this is POEM, paid, owned, or earned media. So paid media includes all the traditional stuff and the new stuff that we talked about that requires an actual investment in terms of an ad. So it could be an online ad or an offline ad. It could be paid search. It could be sponsored posts on Facebook. It could be even a paid social media influencer could be part of that, or a billboard for traditional media. Those, you get the picture. Unpaid, however, is a catch-all that covers these two areas called owned and earned. So it's your owned assets or earned promo that people sometimes say are free. So I'm going to talk about why unpaid doesn't necessarily mean free. Posting on your blog is free, right? What about the cost of the site? What about when you originally developed the whole site? What about the ongoing hosting? What about the maintenance? What about the time it took to create the resources to optimize or to write the blog itself? You can see that it's not really free. So even though we're calling it unpaid, we're going to start to really know and understand what our investment is. But some of these are the owned types of owned channels that you have, your social media, even your branded content, stuff like that. Whereas earned media, I think somebody mentioned earlier, word of mouth, is not usually a random effect. It's usually a consequence of action. But these earned media still require strategy and tactic. The more strategy you throw at creating this, the better results and cost effectiveness you're going to get out of that. So for instance, PR, publicity is free, right? Publicity is free. You get a story on TV. If you don't pay channel 10 to come do a new story. But the reality is you don't pay in dollars, but you should be investing to build a solid media list of contacts, to distribute your press release, to make pitch calls, all of those things that take time, and or you hire a skilled consultant. There's value in that because they can actually leverage some of this. So earned media can be very valuable, but it needs to be managed and it needs to be considered as part of your strategy. Having a strategy of word of mouth is not valuable, but having a strategy of how you're going to earn word of mouth is valuable. So as much as people say things like TV and print advertising is outdated, who today would not be absolutely ecstatic if you got an accurate, positive story about your business on the news? Or another good one, wouldn't it be wonderful if you had a food product or something that was sold in Costco and you got your product in the Costco Connection, the magazine that they produce and mail out, which by the way is one of the top 5 magazines for circulation in the US. If you want to reach a ton of people, AARP and Costco magazine. So basically getting an article in the Costco Connection, that's earned, unless you actually are Costco, in which case it's owned. So just understanding that there's a place for each and all of this. But if you are long on time and short on funds, then these unpaid areas, even though it's going to cost you something maybe more in time, they would be a great way to build credibility in your marketing mix. So I'm jumping around here. Let me see if this represents one of my favorite unpaid methods. So if you're not using this, this is one that I can almost universally say and recommend, that using email or e-blasts is something that everybody could use. It's one of the most creative unpaid categories there are. Some of the other things that I'm going to suggest is just to really think in the unpaid area very creatively, like the restaurant owner who convinced a radio station to give away a bunch of meals, and so they got some free mentions. You can donate items for charity. I know a stationery and gift purveyor especially Food Purveyor, who did that for giveaways, and they got, make sure you get something for it. Make sure the publicity you get back is credible, or you get backlinks if it's online onto your website. Giving away that e-blast, doing the quarterly newsletter, really curating your list, doing seminars. No, not a lot of you mentioned webinars when I asked about dialogue, but that could be something that could be helpful for you depending on your target market. And then holding those events. And if you are holding events, and many of you said, don't just post it on your social media and talk to the people you already have connections with. Make sure you go in there and add it to local calendars, like Things to Do in Phoenix on azcentral.com, and getting it out there, because you're already investing in the event. Make sure that you promote it well. Be cautious as you go, because a lot of the free stuff, if it sounds too good to be true, sometimes it is. And then really consider, if you are doing these things, do you have the expertise? Do you have the time to handle these? Because poorly executed media can do as much damage as no media. So seek out the know-how, or forego it for a method that's in favor of something that you really have the skill set. All right, time. Okay, we're running behind. Let's just move on to our activity. If you don't have it handy, Esme will hopefully put that in the link again, but you should have all downloaded something called the Idea Starters List. It is very much important to work with a printed handout. So if you don't have this, just get a blank piece of paper, because you can refer to the screen, and then you can jot down the different steps that I ask you to take. You can make your own list, basically, if you can't print this out, if you don't have a printer. If you have a printer, grab some pens, pencils, fun highlighters, something. We're gonna work on this real quickly here. So it looks like this if you did the PDF, but as I said, you wanna print it out. So hopefully everybody's grabbing that or has it printed out in front of you. You're probably already scanning the list. It's not inclusive or meant to be. In fact, there's ideas that have been flowing through your chat that are probably equally important, but it's meant to get some ideas flowing. And as I said, sometimes we just don't sit down and invest the time for this kind of creative thinking. So I'm going to force you to do it. So if you do come up with ideas that are other than these, like if you came up with them as we've been talking or out of the chat, I want you to add them at the bottom or on the back. So you have one place that you're kind of doing some work and markup and creative brainstorming on. All right, so this is going to take a few minutes, and I'm going to have you do several different steps with this same list. So the first time it's going to take a lot longer, because you'll be going through the list for the first time, and then we'll kind of go a little bit faster in the interest of time. If you have more than one person from your business on this webinar, I recommend doing this activity separately and then comparing your answers. Or if you want to take this activity to a group or a team that works on your marketing, that's another fun alternative. So the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to have you circle all the methods that you have used for your business. And I'm going to actually put some instructions on the screen as we go. So if you have some questions about this, go ahead and ask your questions in the Q&A, because I'm going to kind of mute myself to give you less distraction. So we're going to take about 3 or 4 minutes to do this first pass. And what I want you to do is just simply go through the entire list and circle any method that you have used for your business, good or bad. Circle any method. I'm going to be quiet for a minute here as you go through that process. Okay, it's gonna feel like I'm rushing you, but no worries, you can still get through the entire list because the next few passes, you'll be talking or you'll be going and continuing on with your work. So what I want to add to your assignment here is that anything you circled, if you felt that it was a very effective strategy, add a star by it. So I want you to add a star by any circled methods that you thought were very effective. And oppositely, if you tried something and you thought it's not effective, this is not something I want to try again, put a line through it. Still leave it readable because you're going to maybe want to refer back to it. So you're just going to keep going through your list and circling, but add the job of starring something that's very effective or putting a line through something that's not effective. I'll give you a few more minutes on that. And remember, anything that you don't see on the list that you've used, you can add that circle, star, or line through it as well. You can add to this list. So I'm going to keep going. Stay with the task you're on. You can always catch up and finish this later. But if you're done with that evaluation, next, I want you to put a check mark by any methods you have not used, so no circles, but you would like to use or investigate at least, look into. So anything that you don't see here that has maybe come up in the chat or in there, this is where you could add those to the bottom or on the back. But I want you to go ahead and put some check marks out there, things that you've been considering, things that you never thought of, but now you are going to consider. Check mark any methods you have not used, but would like to investigate for future use. So even if you're not done with this step, I want you to pause for a minute. You can continue a second. I want you to hear my next advice. If you're just looking at the stars and the check marks, once you get through the list with the check marks. So the stars are those that you believe were most effective. The check marks are things you want to look into. Now I'm going to add a twist to it. I want you to draw a triangle around the star check market for anything that you could do with some kind of cooperative effort. Let me explain. Co-op marketing has a lot of different angles. Co-op, some of you may be familiar with if you rely heavily on some suppliers that might even have formal programs for this. But co-op could be any kind of marketing that you could do with a supplier or even another business that has similar customers. So maybe this idea of co-op is something that you could do to make the reality of some of these ideas happen. Maybe there's a supplier who you could get to support one of these ideas that you have a check mark by. Or maybe there's a way that some of the things that you have been doing that have been effective, you could convince some suppliers for support because you can demonstrate their effectiveness and boost that. Or maybe you have some ideas, and I'll talk about this over again, of another business that has a similar target market but is non-competitive, that you can work together and to enhance some of these particular ideas. They have more power if you can do co-op. So just to give you that, plant that seed, go and look at some of those stars and check marks and just think for a moment as I'm silent again. I'm just going to give you about 1 minute on this to consider if there's some co-op opportunities. Okay, so in the interest of time, we're going to move on, but I want you to hold on to this and finish it if you didn't. This is the sort of like a starter page. This is a way of becoming unstuck in your status quo thinking in terms of your marketing mix. So you'll want to keep it in front of you. We're going to talk about some other considerations of choosing media, and you will need to kind of look back at some of your marks here. And maybe even make some notes on this, on how you think some of these vehicles will serve your business, given the considerations that I've either mentioned or will mention. And then later we'll look at hopefully in a few minutes, we'll look at another tool that could be used to evaluate some of the costs as you consider these methods. So the last consideration that we have here in terms of media is what I call matchmaking. And I'm going to go through this fast because we've covered a lot of this prior sessions. But I still think it's pretty important, and I can tell you why, because I looked at your assessment and the answer to one of the questions, which was number 4, check your answer there. Anyone can use my product or service. I don't have a target market. So go back and review session 1, listen to session 1, because the importance of having a target market is so that you can better reach them. And so one of the things when you're matching your media is that you really do need to be able to explain the center of your target market. So yes, your target market may have a more broad scope than some businesses, or you may have more segments, but knowing each of those segments, demographic and geographic, psychographic, and buyer behavior characteristics will help you reach them. And you need to define your target market in order to do that, because you're going to really need to demonstrate that that media reaches this target market. And if you don't have a target market, it's going to get very hard to do that. And this goes for both paid and unpaid media. So all of these criteria are important. I know the internet is global, but your customer prospect is probably not. And I'll tell you why. Because, for instance, online, running an arbitrary Spotify ad without knowing enough about your target market audience, yeah, you can say maybe even gender and location, but if you don't know enough about your target audience, you won't be able to use their advanced targeting tools. So for instance, you could be targeting by specific platform preferences or genre and different podcast selections. The key is that you're going to waste money talking to the wrong audience. So if you were here for session 1, we created a customer persona, and you'll remember I asked you to define things like their preferred activities, because interest targeting even online requires really knowing things about your audience. So if I was on Spotify, I could pick things like cooking or running or travel or tech or parenting. And it might not be that my product is those things, but I've got some information about my target market. So not to belabor a point here, but this is really important in knowing your target market and spending the time on doing some good definition and some good segmenting there to help you with your media matchmaking. Otherwise, it just costs more money. It's just could be more wasteful. Purpose is something that we've talked about already, on purpose in terms of the messaging, all of that kind of thing. I'm going to add a little sub message here, and that is that considering retention and growth within your existing customer base is really important in terms of selecting your media. If you throw all your media money, and this is not talking to those of you who are starting out because you're going to be developing new customers, but those of you with existing businesses, consider what portion of your budget the purpose has to do with new acquisition, and goes back to that goals, what part of it has to do with retention or growth within your existing markets, your existing customers. The little tip up here is that acquiring a new customer can cost 5 times more than retaining an existing customer. So go through your list that you just created at some point, probably not right now where we're deep diving, but go through and see which of those media are appropriate for the purpose of getting them to come back and give you more additional business. So that's one of the things is maybe some of these, your purpose needs to be about retention. Which media work for that? Another thing to think about in terms of purpose, many of you with local businesses and those of you that are intent on creating actual traffic to your store or location, and this applies somewhat to the website too, but the offline marketing might have more of a role if you have a physical location, a brick and mortar business. So that kind of media purpose kind of can drive that type of selection of media. So then the last matchmaking part is going back to our ADA. Is the media going to get them through that entire process from attention to action? Remember, the action doesn't have to be a purchase, but whatever the desired goal is from that particular communication. So when you select each tactical method, ask, is there enough space, room to accomplish getting from attention to action to be appropriate for your message? I gave the example of the billboard before. Is yes, you can have all 4 steps, but it's not going to be the same in a billboard as it is in an email. So back to your idea starters list. And let's just say, let me give you some guidance for circled methods. I think Esme, let's do the poll here. So let's look at your list, and as you look at your list and what you marked up, it's okay to choose more of these than one, so you don't have to answer just one. See which of these statements are true about your exercise that you did. The poll is about which statements can be true. More than one can be true.
So we only have one person who's answered so far. I'll give them a minute so they could.
So Esme, let's take a look at it because I want to keep rolling on this and give them some advice based on the response, and even if it's not a full response. Good. So what I see is that there's a lot of good check marks, which is actually the answer that I most would like to see. But let's talk about, what if some of those areas were a little bit less, like if you only had a few methods circled, and that's, usually if you haven't tried very many things. So for those methods that you did have circled, and maybe they weren't stars, maybe you crossed them out and I said to keep them visible, I want you to make sure that you've decided this question: am I going to stop or am I going to continue? And some of the things we talked about today should help you evaluate that and help you determine whether there's just something maybe wrong in terms of your creative execution, or help you evaluate the cost effectiveness, or whether you're doing enough of it in terms of reach and frequency, which we still have to talk about. Also, maybe you can do that better job of matching some of those things that we talked about already. So these are some of the things you can take to your SBDC counselor and start to talk about in terms of those circled methods that were not working. But for those circled methods that were working, I said this earlier, take a few minutes later after the seminar to figure out what is it that you think is making them effective. Are they a good match to the target market? Is it because those C's in terms of the message and purpose are great? Better use of our own best practices are going to be the thing that'll give this catapult to some of the new methods as well. So examine these more closely. For any of the check marks or the stars, we're going to do this process of constant evaluation and implement. And that's why I really am talking fast, so I can get to the point about measurement so that you can really get to those points. And then I mentioned already, which are specific to retention, sort of maybe put an R or identify, where am I focusing on retention versus new customer acquisition or conversion or something like that. For the triangles, that's just me encouraging you to go ahead and get creative here. Reach out, start to look for more co-op partnerships. Here's one of my challenges for today. Every single one of you should start working on at least one co-op marketing partner this month. Start for suppliers, or there's an exercise I call the people magnet exercise. You think of 10 physical places that your target market persona, another reason to create one, 10 different places that your target market persona would go to. And it could be an online place, it could be, and then approach them with a win-win cross promotion. So that's where we're going to there. Okay. As we leave the idea starters exercise, one more thought. Don't forget about the internal marketing channels. So especially if you are a brick and mortar business or a B2B business, or you have a big marketing team, a sales team, or anybody that's just frontline interacting with your customers, make sure you're including them. Just write this down, star it. They need to be involved in every one of these marketing campaigns through the incentives that you can give your staff, through signages that you put up in-house. You just always think about this. And I have examples that I'm going to give you, but I'm not going to give you them because we're kind of running behind. But just keep in mind that you have to run this through the entire organization, which is another benefit of a documented written marketing plan. All right, I really want to get to this. So we are going to stream through what I call the last part of this, or second to last part of media selection. And that is it enough? How do we know when's enough? And that's about impressions. We've covered a lot, but to choose cost-effective media, you need to sort of be able to evaluate and compare them. And it's good to know a little bit about how you would count your media. And impressions is one of the standard ways that we count them. That impressions means the total number of exposures that get to the audience through a media or a method. It's usually used in terms of paid advertising. And often we even buy the advertising based on impressions. But even if that's not the way we're paying for it or the way that the cost is out there, it's still important. And impressions is a formula of reach, the number of people you touch with that message, or the number of people exposed to that message, and frequency, which is the number of times that you touch each reached person with your messaging. So these are important, I believe, for comparing one media against another, or for building that synergy of a whole campaign. They're sort of like the main balancing act to consider as you're allocating out budget, choosing between media, or like I said, building, stacking your media together. How many people will you reach? Reach is important. You need to reach more people for more business. It's a number game. However, spend too little on frequency and you will waste what you spend on reach. So analogy I like to think of is consider the reach to be the seeds and the frequency to be the water. If you have a choice of mailing one direct mail piece to 10,000 people or mailing a direct mail piece to 2,500 people 4 times, I want you to think about the fate of those 10,000 seeds that you just watered once. Unless you have some kind of strange water rights and you can get additional water, sometimes it makes sense to go for less reach and more frequency. And the reason for this is that marketers pay attention to frequency for something that's sort of a little bit on that art, not science level of called threshold of response. It's kind of it's a studied area, so there's some science behind it, but the threshold of response is variable. What we do know is that there is one. There is some threshold where it's the minimum level of exposure to advertising that has to happen before customers really respond. So this is a little bit complicated, and I'm not going to go into too much depth here, but it's the creator of synergy, and there's no magic formula. It depends on the variables, but it's often estimated to be sometime above 3. Okay, so sometime above 3 times it takes before you're even on the radar. Then there on the other end of it, there's sometime in this curve after a certain number of impressions that you've wasted, or you might even create what we call in terms of that the repetition going too far, a negative exposure. So you can do some research if you want to make it scientific about your audience response to advertising to try and figure out what that threshold effect is, but most small businesses don't have the money for that. Instead, they follow certain rules of thumb, and they just understand that the benefit is to try and get into this really effective slot here of having just the right amount of frequency. And good creativity and good messaging helps. It can make up for some frequency, but I just think that most people don't heed the warning. It's not usually a good idea to throw your money away for a single big bang when you can take several smaller shots at the target. Okay, so threshold is really, really important. So I've been expressing sort of these positivities of frequency over reach, but sometimes there are situations when high reach is needed, like new brands, new products, introductions, that kind of thing. You have a need to build a lot of awareness, or also maybe at later stages in the life cycle, if you're trying to attack the next generation or new segments of buyers. So there's really a lot to consider here, but it would be remiss for me not to tell you to think about this as you're thinking about your media. There's no precise cross-media measurement methodology, so we're kind of in some ways stuck with some inexact instruments. It's not a perfect technique. Digital has a better way sometimes of measuring some of this, but this gives you a tool to work with. Earlier, we mentioned consistency when we were talking about the first M of messaging. I'm bringing it up again because consistency, along with style, brand, language, and all of that, that can help lower the threshold. The more consistent you're going to get, it's going to help with the credibility and the influence. So you can boost impact. Last session, we talked about the principles of persuasion and social proof and authority, and those are the things about making that credibility and creating that influence. So bringing these up. And then lastly, what you do as far as how you concentrate and create the synergy evolves from these combination of frequency and reach and your impressions. So consistency is about being visible, controlling your media and your methods so that you can be visible on a regular basis. What does that mean? Well, it means you may not necessarily be on every one of your marketing channels all the time, but you do need to try and make sure you're visible as much as possible and make it seem like if it isn't all the time. And here's a visual for that. There's 3 types of concentration. And you could say weeks or days instead of months, it doesn't matter. One type of concentration is you're just 100% on all the time. That's running ads maybe on a fixed schedule for a long call. And this is for brands who have a lot of competition. They need to constantly be in front of the buyer's minds, and you have to have some money to do that. But if you don't, you can try something called flighting. And it could be on and then off and then on and then off. And figuring out, again, these could be days or weeks, but the idea is to make it feel like it works, or to coincide with some time sensitive campaigns like holiday ads or some seasonality that you want to take advantage of. And then pulsing is like both. Small budgets could attempt some kind of pulsing to stay present all the time with consumers. You go red, then you go green. Maybe you have a little bit of a hybrid in terms of yellow, where you're just working things in your unpaid media area. So these are just some examples of how to allocate. So it could be allocating your time or your dollars. They apply to both, but trying to figure out how you can appear as much as possible. One thing in terms of allocating, it's really important to choose a schedule that doesn't outpace your ability to provide good stuff, relevant content with high quality, meeting those marks that we already identified. In other words, don't bite off more than you can chew, or don't keep eating and chewing out of habit. So that goes back to that posting on social media or adding another channel just for the sake of adding another post, because if it doesn't have a goal and if it's not following your strategy, I'd rather see businesses use one social media channel really effectively than to have 3 that they kind of use poorly. We showed this last time, and so I'm going to bring it up. My message here is that you need to use tools to organize and calculate what's going to work in your marketing mix. This was an example I shared last time, so you can get this example from your counselor because I've shared it with them. This tool doesn't show one of the things that we're going to talk about or that we just talked about, which is impressions, but it does show all of the messaging planned and then all of the media color coded across a calendar. So the purpose with this one was actually to align the content to the messaging, to keep your messaging consistent. So to make sure that you had enough messaging going out across all the channels. More sophisticated tools, I'll show you one, also would include the reach and frequency, so the impressions. But this is a good idea for just looking at how you build up across one message throughout several different media. Here's a different media planner that does show impressions and costs as well. It does not include the synergy of time scheduling, which we talked about, like the content calendar. This one, so one is for more important for looking at synergy and that timing of it. This one is looking for some different information in terms, are we getting that threshold response, and are we getting an effective or a cost-effective response? So you would actually fill in what impressions you're having or aiming for each platform, your costs. Then you can estimate in this tool what kind of response rate. And I'm going to give you an actual walkthrough of a tool that allows you to do that per media, but this allows you to do it across several media. So it allows you to complete a projection, if you can, to help you see an overall return on investment. And return on investment is kind of our next and last thing to talk about in terms of media. And it's important because we all only have so much money to spend, so we want to figure out the effectiveness. The best case is you measure and you track all of your marketing instruments. You keep optimizing in terms of, over time, what's working. The worst case is you track nothing and you wonder what's working. So look at question number 9 on your quiz. I think some of you are measuring the success, about 60%. So somehow in between seems to be the best case for moving in the right direction. So let's talk about how we could do this. Calculating return on investment whenever we can, especially when you're making the choices of in between several media. So you can do a simple calculation per media activity, and I build an easy spreadsheet for you to do that with. So we're going to look at that now. It's going to be this spreadsheet. Esme's on it. She's got it in there. If you didn't already download it, but it's time to open it up if you can in Excel. If you can't, then we'll go through some examples and you can open it up later. But I'd really like you to be able to use it yourself if we can spare the time to do that. So I'm going to go through a couple examples. It's really helpful in calculating sort of the cost per whatever response you're going for. So sales is the ultimate response, but we already said a lot of our marketing activities are designed to take somebody to the next obvious step on a journey. And so every action that you take, every marketing message is not about a final sale. It could be an inquiry. It could be just to capture a new lead. It could be a click through. So the first thing you have to do is decide for this spreadsheet to measure a expected response and a cost per response is what is a response? And you get to decide that based on the goal. And that's what I want you to be able to do before you even start this. So we're going to do that. And then after you do that, we're going to make some simple projections about what cost it's going to get you to that response. In the end, even after you figure out the response, you could also monetize if you know your conversion for responses, you could monetize that into some profitability. So we'll go through this whole step as an example. And then after the example, I'll let you guys try and do it with something and just use some estimated things. So the first example that I like to use is my Facebook example. I pretend there's a cleaning business. So maybe one of you has a cleaning business that uses Facebook ads to get traffic to their website. Some of you have said social media is a really effective way for you to use one of those unpaid media, or maybe you're using a paid media. So this example is somebody who's investing in a Facebook ad campaign. So they're using the paid media. And maybe you're doing this, maybe you're already estimating and getting there. So the first thing you got to do is enter an estimated response rate. So my cleaning business estimates a 1% response rate. And that's really actually a little bit above average, but maybe the cleaning business knows their target market really, really well, and they have really, really good creative. I know they have a really good offer. So they're going to project a good response rate to their ad that they're putting on Facebook. And the second thing we need to know is the size of audience. And based on their Facebook bid, their audience parameter to be expected was 62,000 very well qualified impressions, because they listened to all of the parameters of knowing their target market, and they've been really good at selecting their audience. So you can see that as I put that in there, it gives me a calculation of 620, which would be the expected response or the clicks, because our goal, our response was click through to my landing page on my website, 620 clicks. To calculate what that cost is, we need to know what our total cost is. And let's say the cleaning company spent $500 on that ad, but let's say they also threw in an extra $250 because they weren't really great at design and they really wanted to have a really wow creative. So the $250 plus the $500 on Facebook means they spent $750 on the ad, which interprets down into $1.21 per response. This is the formula that's built in there. Make sure you're entering only in the slots that I ask you to enter, because the formula is in these colored cells. So only enter numbers in the uncolored cells if you want the spreadsheet to work. So let's say that already tells you something. If you're comparing different media, that will tell you cost per response. But remember, our response was just a click through to the site. What if we want to see what this actually converts to? If you know your conversion rates, or if you over time you've been starting to track that, or even if you want to guesstimate, you can make some projections for at least this particular activity. So cleaning company experiences an 8% conversion rate, and that's really high for a lot of people in their industry. But again, they put together a really, really good offer. They had an actual cost savings. There was a price-based offer, and they've tested this offer and they know it's a good offer, and they are going to get 8% conversion rate on their scheduled cleaning because their ads hit the right customer and they've got a good offer. Now, however, their profit, because they discounted it so high on that really good offer, their profit for each of those new cleanings that they schedule is $50. So that means that if they have this conversion rate, they can express basically just under 50 sales from this activity. And they will make, and this is not their gross, this is what they will profit, just under $2,500. So remember, but compare that to the cost. So they're looking at more than 3 times what they spent. Okay. So my version compares the costs to unit profitability. So this is not the macro, this is the micro for you to look at and kind of evaluate. It also is just talking about this one single activity, this one single method. I think it's important, and I'll show you another quick example to really look at. Actually, we won't have time to go through the other example, but there's a situation, and let me even just share with you the end result. There's a situation where you might not even cover the cost of your marketing, and you would still value the marketing method. And this is a quick run through on that. It's not really actually as large as I would like it. In this case, a direct mail case, the cost is $750 and the actual result was about $700 in income. But it created a bunch of new customers. This one was a direct mail for a coffee shop. It created a bunch of new customers, and this coffee shop is known for retaining their customers and doing different bring them back activities. So the customer value will help them exceed the cost of that initial investment. Okay. I'm sorry that we're running out of time because I really wanted to take you through every single step of this, but I'm not able to give you the time to practice that right now. The steps are on the worksheet, okay? So these are the steps that you will go into, and you can take the time to go through this for some of those checkmarked activities that you want to investigate. You may not have all the information. You might have to do some research on what it does cost to do some of those methods so that you can complete this sheet. And you may have to work with a counselor to go ahead and complete that and to get some ideas and projection on what your conversion rates will be. So let me talk about, we talked about cost per response, and the value of the response is more than just the sale. We talked about qualitative return. I want to just briefly mention just the idea of a total return on ad spend. So that whole idea of maybe as you looked at that one spreadsheet where you're tracking all of your different media, but you have a lot of opportunity. An ROAS benchmark is something that will help you as you look at media going forward. So that's a great thing to look at. Some of the automation tools will help you, and they will actually calculate the return on ad spend. But that other spreadsheet that I showed you earlier can do that as well. During tough times, it's common for businesses to cut back. So I wanted to give you a really, really quick run through on some ways to do that. Cutting back is not usually a smart move when it comes to marketing, because if prospects don't know about your business, you can't grow your sales. But lean practices have been in place now for a while under COVID, and hopefully some of these methods you're already employing. If not, as you move forward and your budget becomes a little bit stronger, these are still some good things to do. I already mentioned planning and target market. I can't say that enough, but I'm not going to say any more right now. You know that that's a way to be cost effective. I already mentioned use some unpaid to balance the paid. That's going to give you that compounded threshold. You're going to have some lower cost, bigger time investment, and you're going to use some of the paid to help you deliver some numbers. One thing to do right now is to negotiate and to look for deals. Remember I talked about those traditional media? Well, lately, they've been a lot less expensive than they were in the past. There's something called remnant advertising, which is, some of those media, if they don't sell it, then, they don't run an ad, they miss the opportunity. So they might be willing to sell it for less money than before, called remnants. So it's the leftover media space that they haven't been able to sell. Lots of ways to negotiate in terms of local media. So I just recommend trying that, if you can. It's not something that's necessarily available to us. It's more common in traditional media. There was another point I was going to make about, but point is, amazed what you can negotiate these days. I already talked about co-op advertising, way to find extra money to go to help you and others get more bang out of your buck. We're hopefully going to have time to mention a few other ways of automating, but automation is a transformation for marketing efforts. It can make it cheaper to manage a lot of data and when you're measuring things. But automation is also a cost. And so there's some cost-effective solutions that I will get to in the next few minutes that might help you on that. Also, we already said that retaining customers it's important to retain. It's more cost-effective to retain a customer than it is to get a new customer. And there's lots of data that supports that. But my other important reminder is you can't become more cost-effective without measuring what you're doing. The more you measure, the more you can actually, the more you analyze your data, the more you can actually perfect it. And you can really sophisticated with digital on doing this. If you aren't an expert at analytics, it might be worth it, cost-effective wise, to pay somebody to really help you track what works best. You can run things, they call them A/B tests, where you track your actual creative and your content and your offers. But there's a lot of ways that you can measure this stuff. Do be careful, because consultants can, there's click fraud and invalid traffic, and you've got to be careful what you're measuring to make sure you're measuring the right thing. I'm going to go through this one later. So in summary, we talked about the types of media. So does the media make sense for my business? Number one, is it a good match to that target market and message? Is it going to be believable? Can I deliver the numbers I need? Will I reach that threshold response? One shot, blowing the wad, just planting the seeds, or watering it frequently? Which way to go? And then how, if possible, can I measure the return on investment? Is that media affordable? Is my entire synergistic campaign delivering a good return on investment? I'm going to really quickly take my time to get into M3, even though we only have about 10 minutes. I'm going to be quick with this one. So like any other part of your business, I think these are the keys. You've got all of these other things going on, but if you don't measure it and you don't manage it, it's pretty much going to wilt away. So consistency plays a role here. If you answered, if you refer back to that assessment, number 9 was measuring the success. I really want a yes answer there. And there are some things that we can do in terms of measurement that are going to up your game. So if you're already measuring, great, do some more of this. If you're not measuring it, here's some of what you can do. If you're already measuring, then get more granular, more precise. That means looking deeper at your insights, maybe your social media. Those of you who are using social media know you're successful, you're measuring it. How else can you get granular? This is really important. Tweak selectively. That was, I mentioned A/B tests, measure different created, measure different audience over different channels. Those are also something that you might need some assistance with if you're not used to looking at analytics. Another thing is that people usually do one or the other. They track their leads they're developing, or they track their conversion. It's really important to track the full funnel movement. And if you have certain tools, this will be done automatically. But if you don't, just pay attention to the goal. Remember, as your goal leads, you're measuring that goal. How many leads did I pull into the funnel? Then move on to some other goals. What is your sales lift or your conversion metric? So that you remember you've got to not only get those leads, but you've got to turn them into the next step on the journey or your actual sale. And then when I say gain efficiencies, it's usually combining things and using some more technology. Unifying analytics tools. HubSpot is really great for this. You know, you could be spending all day long if you have to check your Google Analytics, then you have to check your Facebook, and then you have to look at your content management. So automation has a way of trapping you into tracking everything. I do think that there are efficiencies out there, and you need to look for them. But I do say if you can't measure it or you don't have time to measure it, it might not be worth doing it. What should you measure? These are a few of the areas that I think are important for starter metrics. For most of you have websites, right? And I think the most important thing is to regularly look at your website and your Google My Business analytics. That's another really important thing. Make sure you're looking at traffic. Make sure you're looking at unique visitors. That's important too. If you have the same person who's working on your website, touching your website 100 times and you haven't excluded them from your count, you're not counting anybody that's going to impact your business. Differentiate from channels so that you know where it's coming from. There's a lot of ways I could get into website, but I'm going to also talk about engagement. Remember we said the dialogue versus the monologue. So whatever it is that you're working with, whether it's your website, your social media, or your emails, measure the click-throughs, measure the time on sites, measure your bounce rates, measure average times on page and things like that. So really look at your engagement. And then the conversion side of it is back to those goals. Configuring your analytics, if you don't know how to do it with tag managers and tracking codes, get somebody who does, because this is the granular data that I talked about. You can take a class, you can hire a consultant, you can watch a video, get started in one of these areas and keep moving into a deeper dive here, because this is the stuff that's going to make your marketing move mountains. Otherwise, you could get lucky, but I don't think you want to run your business like playing the lottery. So this is the stuff that helps you really manage your business. All right, mechanisms, really quickly. These are some different areas. I'm not going to be able to talk about each and every one to the length that I wanted to, but some of these best practices have to do with really incentivizing. That was session 2. We talked about sales promo. As far as automation, there are at least 3 things I would automate and that are affordable for smaller businesses. One is if you have if you need to track your leads, you need to have something like HubSpot or Salesforce or a B2B version to actually nurture your leads through a funnel. The second one is email. I already said everybody should be doing email marketing. So that's an easy one. Constant Contact you can start with, or MailChimp for as little as $15 a month. And then a social media management tool, maybe combining for efficiency if you have more than one platform like Hootsuite or Sprout. And then there's some comprehensive, I think I mentioned HubSpot, that'll do a lot of these things put together. So time management, if you can't have the time to get it done, then find the delegation. Outsourcing can have rewards. I could do a whole webinar on good tips for outsourcing, but at least this one might be worth putting in your pocket. Require measurement on everything you outsource. If I'm asking you to hold yourself accountable to measurement, your vendor should share that same responsibility to demonstrate what's working. Interrelation, we've talked about. Repetition, we've already talked about my superheroes, consistency and repetition. Just remember that, repetition can borderline on too much. So hashtag not too much of the same thing. Don't be annoying. All right, guys, management is the plan and the pivot. It's basically old school marketers. This is called the marketing mix. Everything that we've talked about to this far is important, but really the plan is what locks all the coordinates in. The pivot is you can correct the steering when you're off course, but you need those coordinates locked in to get you where you're going. The quality of your marketing will improve as you address it in this way, holistically, strategically, as you document things, and as you get clarity as you go through the process. And communicate to your team. I think that's another one that I've already mentioned. Always let your employees or your outsourcers or anybody on the team know what's going on. Make your plan available at all levels in the organization, just at a briefer, different level. PowerPoints work great for that. Okay, so the scores from earlier. I think the biggest areas that everybody focused in on is strategy is simple. I do whatever the competition, but one better. that's a simple strategy, but what we really want to see is that you're not just responding reactively to what others are doing or the market is doing, that you have a plan that includes some of the evaluation and the components that we've talked about. Another biggie, anyone can use my product. Remember, having the target market is actually going to save you money and make your work more effective. So it's not about anybody and everybody using your market. All right, guys, I think we're down to the wire here. I'm actually going to take questions, open it up for questions.
So we do have 2 questions from Garth. So he asked, how do we find psychographic information for our target?
Oh, you're fading out, Esmond, but I think I heard the question as, how do you find the psychographics? So there's a ton of different ways, but let me get you, if you have a SBDC counselor, ask them about the growth wheel tools that help with target market. Psychographics are basically values, attitudes, and lifestyle attributes. And you can go to the source, meaning your customers, if you have them, and start to interact with them. There's formal and informal ways. On one of my other slides that we skipped, I said, don't just ask people how they heard about you. Get a lot more detail from them if you can. So that can be as informal as conversations with your customers, or it could be sending out an actual survey where you can talk about some of those things and tie the values and attitudes to your product or service. In addition, there's market research out there about psychographics for industries. So you can Google a lot of the psychographic information, create your customer persona.
And he mentioned buying buyer behavior is just as difficult for me as I haven't even started sales or advertising.
Yeah. So it is hard when you're starting up. And so there are some tools, the SBDC Net and IBIS World reports on industry data. If you belong to any organizations in your industry or field, you want to start to network with that, because there's information out there, even if it's not about your business and your customers, about your industry and like businesses and like customers that you can gain. And the internet, I mean, you'd be amazed how much information is out there that you can research on buying behavior for your particular product or service.
That was it for the questions. We don't have any more open questions.
All right. I hope that I didn't drive everyone crazy with how fast I went. This should really be 2 webinars, and so maybe in the future it'll get chopped up so we can go into more depth. There's more coming from the SBDC in June. There's going to be, and this is a really important one, about using the social media platform YouTube. It's a Grow with Google series, so that's a great one. And then SBIR, this is about seed funding, and that's another important one if you're looking at an SBIR eligible enterprise. Then a webinar that the IRS is giving on business income and how it's taxed. Several of you have asked, even during and offline of this series, how to go back. There are recordings of all 3 sessions of the Great Marketing Turnaround. I know it's not as fun to do live because you don't get the fun polls and you get the chats, but it could still be beneficial, especially if you wanted to review or if you missed some of the earlier sessions. So just go to the Arizona SBDC YouTube channel to find those recordings. Also, we talked earlier at the beginning about using your counselors to help you move through some of these challenges in terms of marketing. So taking these tools that we didn't really get to spend enough time on and spending time during one of your counseling sessions. If you don't have an SBDC counselor, you can sign up to request no cost counseling, get an initial counseling session. And then you would be able to work with that counselor or any co-counselors that might be subject matter specialists. Usually this happens over a series of time where you might graduate from one issue and start working on a counselor or working with a counselor on another issue. And of course, tracking each of the successes that you have as you go. So counseling is definitely something to consider as you go through this, but hopefully some of those tools help you get a little bit unstuck. That's it, guys. I actually made it just by the wire to keep you on 2 hours. Please give us feedback. Your evaluation is our way of measuring. So anything that you can help us out with in that regard. There's a couple of clicks to get to the survey, I think, but please take the time. It just takes a few seconds. And thank you.
Heidi, we did have one quick question. I'm sorry. My business is going to be new construction. How soon should I start marketing? Is that a quick question?
Is going to be. So there's a lot of like sub questions under that one. I do think that yesterday is the correct answer, but I also believe that the series has been about making a plan and a strategic plan. So the answer is, how quickly can you put together a plan that makes sense for implementation? You have to have your product and service viable before you can, really make use of your customer lead development. So there's too many variables to answer it in a concise industry specific way. But my answer would be, do you have a plan? If you've got a plan in place, you can start working on the components of the plan. You can start building that website. You can start front loading all of these calendars and schedules. You can start doing a lot of this and then turn the switch live once you know you have the delivery methods in place. Because if you knew your customer's journey, you know it's going to take them a way to go through this. And you're going to have certain things in place to handle their, to sell all the different advantages of your business and to handle their objections. So I think that's a really good one to take to the SBDC counselor.
Thank you, Heidi. Bob, did you have any closing remarks real quick?
No, just thanks for letting me on. Great session. Hope everybody got something good out of it.
Okay, thank you everyone for joining us.
Bye.